Hello, everyone. Again, welcome back to Dead Money. I know I said at the end of the last episode that I'd be doing some hand histories, but in light of this man flipping the table, that's a video that's gone viral at the Harrah's Cherokee World Series of Poker Circuit event. We're gonna hit on this first. So, a couple things on it. Well, first, just watching that video is just shocking and hilarious, but after seeing it, it's just like, yes, this is exactly why I started this podcast. Just to make some sort of attempt at distressing the lunacy and idiocy we see and hear every day. Because it's unbelievable. Now, I've seen and heard stories of people doing some really vile things, like peeing on dealers. I think I heard someone did that once at Commerce, and that's probably happened more than once, I'm sure. And I think 3 summers ago, when the World Series of Poker had just started, I was playing one night at the Harrah, and I saw some guy just storm out of the room cursing, just knocking over trash cans and just causing all this commotion. And it's because, like I've told you, poker brings out the absolute worst in people. And it's largely because the game is so incomprehensibly streaky sometimes that people just get so overwhelmed that they can't even take it. And then they just lash out. And when we all first learned the rules and how to play, and when we all first saw how the game worked and when it was alive and, on its feet, and how enthralling and exciting all that felt, could any one of us have ever imagined just how infuriated and sickened we'd ever be at times from playing? It's kind of surreal, isn't it? I was 18 when I first learned how to play, and I had just started my first semester in community college. I was home on a Friday night with a couple friends. We were trying to think of something to do, and my friend pulled out a deck of cards, and he said he could teach us any game, and I had just seen Rounders a few months before that, but I was half asleep the whole time, so I didn't remember very much, but I do remember they were playing Hold'em, and I thought it was this interesting game, because it only involved 2 cards. So I asked if he could teach us Hold'em, and, that night my whole life changed. I always knew what the poker hand rankings were, but I never understood how the game worked with the betting and the rules and everything and pushing the pot. And once I did, I thought this is the most badass game in the world to be good at. And from that point on, I was already working towards making this a full-time gig. And I think when every player made the decision to play professionally, that they all knew this was going to be extremely difficult. But then, like myself, they found out it was going to be even harder than that, much harder. And I've asked people, if we could have actually known just how difficult this was really going to be, would we have still done it? Now, it's not something that you can actually have an answer to. It's kind of just a question for food for thought. But the point is, poker is a doozy. And whenever someone who just has a normal working career or whatever tells me, oh, you got the best job. Oh, you got the sickest life. You're so lucky. And I'm not saying that I'm not, or that it isn't the best job. Although it isn't really a job. It's work. It's very hard work. But it's not a job. Because a job pays you a fixed amount with a set schedule, and that's not what poker is like at all. But either way, every time I hear someone say something like that to me, and it's happened a lot over the years, the only thing I think of is, all right, well, if it's such a great job, do you want to trade? You want to try this? And, all the people who say, oh, I wish I could do what you do. How many days or even hours do you think it would be before they're on both knees begging for their old job back? Now, I just started my 18th year of full-time play, and the number one thing that has kept me going through all of this is, without question, the freedom. That's always been the biggest incentive to do this. Because the only thing I love more than playing poker is not playing poker for as long as I want, whenever I want. And it's a fair deal. When you think about all the losing and aggravation that every poker player has to deal with all the time and overcome, it's kind of just only fair that they can disappear from it whenever they feel like it. Because I said to people, to try and get them to understand just how excruciating this can be at times, I was like, all right, think about your job. I said, think about someone you work with who you can't stand the most. And now try and picture yourself at the end of the day, your boss coming up to you and saying, great job, but now you personally have to give $2,000 out of your own pocket and give it to that person. And not only that, that person did their job terribly today. Well, every day, tons of professional poker players have to do that. Now, how do you think, an average person with a normal working career would feel trying to comprehend such a thing? Could they even compute it? How would they feel by the time they did? Anything short of psychotically irate? So, that's what makes this, not such a great job in some ways. I mean, look, every job has its drawbacks. No line of work is perfect. Now, look, I've never flipped a table or peed on a dealer or threw any sort of real tirade of sorts. I mean, there's plenty of times I've been wearing either the aggravation or the depression on my face, or maybe briefly trolled another player when I was really upset, really frustrated, but I never just completely blew a gasket like this guy did. I mean, the most emotion I've ever shown was a little over 9 years ago. I moved to LA for what only ended up being a few months, and it was after this night that I made the decision that I'm just going to move back to Vegas. But on this night, I was playing 2-5 at the Hustler. I hadn't committed to playing 2-5 all the time yet. I was still playing higher for the most part. So 2-5 was still like a supplementary game for me back then. I just wanted to play it on nights where I wanted to play but didn't want the bloodbath. Anyway, so that game has a 1K max. And I was having a pretty big game. I was up about 2,500 at one point, and we had this guy who was really whaling it up big time. I mean, he got into this game for 9,000. And that's a little hard to do. And I remember because I was counting out all the times he was pulling out another dime. And I remember saying to him after he made some comment about his bad luck, or I don't know, as if he wasn't playing completely dreadful the entire time, I said to him, "Hey, you might get it back." And then he said, "Oh, yeah, sure." Like I was intentionally trying to give him false hope. And yeah, I was kind of doing that, but I kind of meant what I said too, because poker is so fucking streaky. So then comes a hand where I doubled him up. I don't remember who had what. But then the next hand, I doubled him up again. Back-to-back hands. And these were not small pots. But whatever, game on. And then a few hours later, we get into another battle, and I doubled him up. Now this one, I remember, was a really big pot. I don't remember what the hands were. I just know that it was a pure coin flip scenario. Something like I had a pair and a flush draw versus, I don't know. It was just a dead even heat, but he won. So now I've doubled him up 3 times. And then the next hand, I doubled him up again. So this is now the second time I've doubled this guy up in back-to-back hands. 4 times altogether, since 2 plus 2 is 4. And the fourth hand, I kind of remember. I think I had ace-10 and flopped a 10 for top pair. He bet into me, and I raised kind of big, and he called. And the turn was a king or a queen. He checked, and something told me I should just check back. But I bet, and of course he jams. It was probably only a few hundred more, and I knew I was beat, but I was so freaking tilted that this time I just called it off, and he just has king-queen, and he holds once again. And as I was paying off this pot, I was just slamming the chips into the middle of the table, and I just kept saying, "Beautiful! Beautiful!" So that's the most pissed off I ever got, and nobody gave me any shit for it. So I was up 2,500 and finished the night down 2,500, and to go backwards 5,000 in a 1K max 2-5 game in just a few hours with this guy in it, that's not that easy to do. And then just the way it happened, throw in the fact that I'm doubling him up back-to-back hands on not 1 but 2 occasions, that was too much. So that's what it took to get me to crack that much. And remember when I told him, hey, you might win all your money back? Well, he didn't quite do that, but he got a lot of it back, and basically all of what he did recoup came from me. And I think when he left, he probably only lost about 3,500, which is still a pretty big shellacking to take out a 2-5 game, but it pales in comparison to 9,000. But the thing about all this is, it's like, yeah, I got really angry that night, but it's really never the game itself that really does this to you. You know, this was obviously an exceptionally bad night to have, but the reaction was more about things going on in my life that a night like this was just exposing, you know? Because at this point in my playing career, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do anymore with poker. I mean, its emotional servitude had really been starting to fade, and I was getting really burnt out from playing higher. I'd been coming back from the last few months, but was doing so from the biggest downswing I'd ever been on. I moved to LA to try and, make another run at stand-up and improv and acting, but as soon as I got into town, I just didn't even give a shit, so I was just playing poker. So I guess a night like this was just sort of necessary for me. Because there was just something cosmic about it when you think about what happened, and I just felt like the universe was telling me, you should not be living in Los Angeles, just go back to Vegas. And after this game was over, I'm just sitting in my car, bawling my fucking eyes out at 7 in the morning because, God, how was any of that even possible? Doubling up the same fucking whale 4 times, back-to-back hands twice, when they're only spaced out by a couple hours? I don't know. All I know is 1 in a million or billion or trillion means it would be weird if it never happened, so it's got to fall on somebody. But there was definitely a catharsis because that's when I realized, okay, I'm just going to leave LA. And that provided some relief, even though I just had an incredibly, just unthinkably miserable night of play. And it wasn't just the money. I mean, yeah, $2,500 is, that's some money to lose, especially when you're up $2,500 in the game, but it's not really the money. I mean, it's just because I'd taken plenty of losses so much bigger than that, plenty of times. I mean, sometimes it's just, you can't play poker for the money. You have to play for the game. If you're only into this for the money, I mean, poker is going to eat you alive. So if you're not really playing for the love of the game, it's just not worth it. There's too much defeat. There's too much soul-crushing moments. There's just too much of those things to get past all of it unless you really care about the game itself. And I believe that you could be running really, really bad at like 10 and a quarter, and maybe you lose 25,000 in like 2 months. Or you could be playing 2-5, and you could be running like really bad at that too, but still winning a little bit because the game just makes too many mistakes for you to lose. Even though at one game you're up 3,000 and the other one you're down 25,000, the amount of aggravation you're going to feel from the way things have been going and how much traffic you've had to fight through and just all the above, it's still going to feel somewhat comparable. I mean, it's nice to be making some money and it's nice to be not losing your ass, but look, I've gone through both. I've gone through long losing periods playing 10-20 and I've gone through long stretches of 2-5 where I'm only winning a little bit. And I mean, yeah, of course you'll take winning a little bit, but like mentally, no, I really don't feel that much better. Because you're still going through the same amounts of aggravation. And in a way, the 2-5, it's going to be even more aggravating because you feel like there should be no way you should be losing. I mean, it's just like, how? How can I be losing in some of these lineups? When you're playing higher, the lineups are tougher, of course. So, your expectations are much lower. So anyway, a month or two later, I'm back in Vegas. It's the beginning of 2016, and that was when I decided that I want to keep playing full-time, but I'm just going to walk away from the high-limit games. I'm happy with the body of work. I've done enough, so it's okay now just to drop down for my own mental well-being so that you don't have to go through this constant bloodbath. I mean, this is a little bit like football. I mean, every hit takes a little bit more out of you. And if I'm playing lower, it'll be easier to get hours in. It'll be easier to win money, even though you're not going to be winning as much money. I mean, it just seemed better for my health. And as much as I miss playing higher, I just kind of don't have the mojo for it anymore. And that's what's kept me out of it. I mean, I have played it a little bit the past bunch of years, but only here and there and only for 2-3 hours at a time. And I just don't feel the same. And that just kind of defeats the purpose. If I'm not going to be myself when I'm playing a certain game, then I shouldn't be playing. I don't like playing in like this compromised form. And I just remembered one other thing I saw that night at the Hustler. This guy got into a hand with someone where he had ace queen and he made a full house with it. And the pot was really small. Not much had happened before the river, but he bet the river. And then he got raised by some small amount and he just called with this hand. And when someone asked him, what the fuck are you doing? Like, why didn't you re-raise him? You know what his answer was? He just like shrugged his shoulders and he said, the pot wasn't even that big. I didn't feel like it. You didn't feel like it. Okay. 2 things came to mind after hearing that. One, well, maybe the pot would have been big if you had taken some sort of interest in inflating it. And two, you have to figure this guy has only played so much poker, so I just thought, just you wait, buddy. Just you wait until you go on a streak where you run so bad that you can't even fathom it. You're going to remember this hand. And you're going to think to yourself, you know something? Maybe I should have tried to win more money when I had that full house because, gee, what do you know? I'm not moonwalking to the cashier every night anymore. I can't believe it. Now, when I saw this was already after I doubled up the whale for the fourth time and was buried in this game, plus the downswing I was already on, and then I witnessed that, and that's what he said about it. It's just like, gee, ignorance is bliss until it isn't. I didn't say anything to him, but I guess his comment just struck me as something like he probably just assumes he'll always make his share of big hands every night, and if he decides just to not care about one of them once in a while, not a big deal. It's a big deal. And sooner or later, I'm sure he found that out. But no matter what he did, I mean, look, poker just fucks with your head every which way. There's no bigger mind fuck than this freaking little card game. I mean, it can make you feel invincible, and it can really fool you with some short-term randomness into convincing you that you must be this prodigy genius. Or it could lead you to flipping a table over and tarnishing a tournament. I mean, you could have two guys sitting side by side. One of them feels completely hopeless, and the other one feels completely untouchable. Now, as I said about myself, you know, when I started yelling, beautiful, beautiful, and pounding the chips into the table, you know, this was more about confusion about my own life than the brutality of this session, even if it was particularly brutal. And I can only presume that to be the case for this madman flipping the table over. You know, I remember the very first time I ever heard the concept of players getting, like, really angry and tilted that they'd actually blame the dealer for their bad luck. And when I did, I thought, that is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Now, I know that's something we've all said 2,000 times, but that still might be at the top for me. Blaming the dealer? People, we're playing poker. Someone has to give you the cards if you wish to play, and it could be anybody. In fact, it wasn't that long ago, players just dealt themselves whenever they had the button. And if you've ever seen that movie, California Split from the 70s, it's a really great movie. It's a Robert Altman movie. Elliot Gould and George Siegel are the main characters. They're gambling degenerates, but they're pretty good at poker. And early in the movie, Elliot Gould is watching a little slideshow tutorial on how to play poker. But during the slideshow, the narrator talked about how each player acts in turn as a dealer. Now, I don't know when poker dealers became a thing, but it's clearly the sensible thing to have. You know, this way the players don't need to concentrate on playing and having some random person deal to them since they could be incompetent or maybe even cheating. But either way, we all know the dealer is never to blame or be given credit for anything. It's all just random. But this is what poker does to people. Losing money at it in a seemingly unfair, unjustified way just provokes people into getting so overloaded that they think and act like total lunatics. It's a little sad. Only a little, though. As for this man at Harrah's Cherokee, well, I'm sure we'll never see him again at any World Series of Poker event. And he may even be prosecuted for vandalism or disrupting a public event of sorts. I don't know. I haven't done any research. I don't care that much to know what happened to this guy. But I guess what I'm wondering now is, what do they do for those tournament players who had their chips thrown everywhere? I mean, they couldn't have been able to retrace every last trip into every player's stack, could they? And assuming not, I don't know. I mean, I guess they can refund them and maybe give them a free entry into an event of the same buy-in figure. I mean, that's something, but, you know, what if you had a really big stack in that event? What if this was your first deep stack accumulated in a tournament in 2 years and now it's all ruined because of this fucking animal? Well, there's a lot of variance in poker, and not all of it is things you can think of, because some of it just has nothing to do with what goes on during the hands themselves, and I guess this is just the newest kind that can take place. Having a man go completely nuclear to the point where he wrecks everyone's stack at an entire table because he insisted on flipping it over. Thinking about it now, it actually reminds me of this time in 2014. I was playing at the Borgata. There was no 510 or 1025 yet, so I was playing 2-5, which at the time was still capped at $500. I'd only been in the game for about 15 minutes, but I was crushing it, so I had $505 in front of me when this other hand happened. And some guy looked to be in his 50s, just a typical New York-looking schmuck, and he took a bad beat. Pot was probably about $800. But after he lost, he still had a stack in front of him of maybe like $100. And this fucking guy winds up and slams all of his remaining chips across the table. Just spews them everywhere. Like a 2-year-old wrecking all of his toys because the little tower he was trying to build came crashing down, and then he just left. He abandoned all of that money. Now, when the dust had all settled, I somehow now had $520 in front of me instead of the $505. And what I should have done is taken that extra $15 and just kept it in my pocket, but instead I gave it to the dealer. And then about a half hour later, maybe less, this guy comes wandering back into the poker room, and now he wants his $100 back. And I can overhear him talking to the floor a little bit and saying things like, "Yeah, I mean, I know I shouldn't have done that, but, you know, you gotta do the right thing." Now, I don't know what the floor has the power to do in this situation, but if it were me in charge of things and I did have the power, I'd be laughing in this guy's face and telling him to get the fuck out of my face. You want to come in here and act like a fucking infant when you lose, and then splatter your chips all over the table, disrupting the game and delaying it on top of it while we sort all your chips out, and probably making this experience uncomfortable for the other players, then forget it. Your chips are gone now. They're confiscated. They belong to us. Call it whatever you want. All I know is we don't owe you anything. Get out of here. Have a nice day. But again, I don't know if the floor is even allowed to do that, but either way, what they did do was stand on their head to make sure that they recovered every last chip that he intentionally threw all over the place and abandoned. Now, maybe he's a whale who plays the house games. I don't know. I mean, we do know the casino will do everything for those people since they depend on them, but they went to the cameras for this asshole, and a little while later, they came back with some news to report to the table. And they went around to each player who wound up with some of his chips and saying, "Okay, you have to give him this much money, you have to give him this much money." And then when they come to me and they say to him, "You have to give him $10. Now, I had $15 extra, so they were mistaken with that, but I already gave that to the dealer. And because I did that, now I'm about to lose $10 in this ordeal because of this fucking raving lunatic crybaby. And I went apeshit on this floor staff. I don't remember what I said, but I got myself kicked out of the poker room that day. It's the only time it ever happened. I wasn't 86. It was just a one-day ejection. You know, like a manager getting thrown out of a baseball game. So I suppose you could say this was the craziest I ever went in a poker room, and it was, but that was not reacting to a bad beat. This time I was going nuts because they bent over backwards for somebody who behaved like a child. And I was telling them, I gave that extra money to the dealer because he splashed it all away and left. And now you're going out of your way in every which direction to make sure he gets every penny back? I mean, it's unbelievable. The only thing I remember saying was, as I was walking to the cashier, I just turned around and screamed at all of them like, "You run this poker room like a bunch of bullshit!" I wrote a letter to the poker room supervisor, but he never replied. I mean, can you imagine yourself doing something like that? Can you ever imagine having a total conniption and then demanding the floor recover every last chip that you just puked all over the place as if you're just entitled to act this way? Maybe they do have some kind of obligation. I don't know. But either way, they could have or should have made an exception and said, look, the guy took the extra money he wound up with and he gave it to the dealer. You're just going to have to eat that loss. We're not making a player give you money out of his own pocket because you couldn't restrain yourself from smashing your chips all over the place after you lost a hand. But who knows? Maybe he's a local, maybe he's a black label, maybe lots of things. All I know is it was me who paid the price that day. So, that's what I get for being nice and giving this free outburst money to a dealer. Should have just waited a little while first to see if there would be any recourse from him. Oh well. I guess I'll do that next time. Because I'm sure one day I will definitely get the opportunity. We'll see you next time.